Welcome to the Spirit of Business, episode number 46, The Importance of Doing Nothing, with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Matt.
I noticed something today. I actually was back in the office after sort of a long time in lockdown with COVID, and things are starting to free up in terms of being back in the office again and also going to clients. And it was so refreshing, I found, driving from the office to a client. And what I noticed is the downtime that I missed during COVID, because I ended up being in front of a screen probably between 8 to 10 hours a day, having meetings as I normally do. But what I found was that I would go from one meeting to the next meeting without any time in between, because you just end up booking up your diary according to the availability of time. And because I wasn't traveling and I wasn't sort of moving from one meeting room to another meeting room or upstairs to downstairs or any of that sort of stuff in the office, I recognized that just this constant, I burnt out a fair bit last year. And I think a lot of it was because of just this lack of downtime. Whereas I really noticed it today, thinking, how nice is it just to drive, from one meeting to the next meeting and have time to decompress from one meeting and then prepare for the next meeting. And it was just, I really noticed it today for the first time, because it's been the first time in almost 12 months since I've done it.
Well, that is really an important theme, I would say. It's funny, twice in the last 2 days, I've had conversations with people who, somebody said to me, oh, you know what, I'm not that disciplined at home. This is somebody who has 4 children. One of them's not even 3 yet. She's been doing a massive corporate job, and then at times there have been 2 or 3 businesses. Her husband has a business, and at times there have been others. So she takes on a huge amount. She says, I'm not really that disciplined at home. And I said, maybe it's not that you're not that disciplined. It's actually that you really need to not be disciplined some of the time. You cannot have all your time structured and disciplined. It will make you crazy. We need that balance. The Chinese always talk about the moderation or the middle way, like anything to an extreme is too much. And I think in this particular regard, it's really important that if we have very busy time, we need really doing nothing time. It's not just about, go home and do the garden and be really busy in the garden. It's time where maybe you're just wandering around the garden and not doing something structured.
It's really interesting though, because we're so wired to being functional and efficient and productive, and that's our business lives. Our business lives are very much, and even what you described then, sort of the hecticness of family and business and employment and running kids around and all that sort of type thing. You're constantly doing something, and I find that we're hard on ourselves, just like that person was when they were talking about themselves, that we're hard on ourselves to go, well, unless I'm being productive with my time, then I'm wasting time. And the word waste comes in. And I think that's what I noticed today, that I would classify driving from work to a client site a waste of time, when I could be more efficient by sitting on Zoom all day and going from one meeting to the next meeting. So I'm a lot more efficient by dealing with Zoom, but I probably didn't recognize the toll it had on me personally by sitting on Zoom all day, every day, without that sort of downtime, for want of a better word, or you could say negative in terms of wasted time. Or I think when I spoke to you about this once before, you talked about yin time. I don't know if it's worthwhile talking about that particular concept, because it made a bit of sense to me.
Yes, I did some work with a guy once. He was a kind of mentor for me, and he was the person who taught me about yin time. So in the Chinese, you have yin and yang, which are the 2 polar opposites, so to speak. And the yang is the more masculine energy. So the more busy, more structured, more directed. It's that kind of energy. And the yin is the more feminine energy. It tends to be less structured, less disciplined, those are the tendencies. And everything in Chinese is can be described in terms of yin and yang. But the interesting thing is that most of the activities that we recognize in our modern Western lifestyle are yang activities. So pretty much everything we do at work is yang. A lot of family activity is yang, especially these days where kids are out playing football and then doing ballet and then doing this and then doing that. It's all yang stuff. And meditation, which does involve a certain kind of, where there's a focusing or something, that's also a yang activity, interestingly. This guy tested everything to find out what that was. And he said, we really, really need yin time as well. And so he told me what activities were yin as opposed to yang. And I'll give you some examples because it's really interesting. So things like lolling around in the ocean, not swimming purposefully to get strong or fit or healthy or do your lengths or do your whatever, but it's kind of jumping waves and lolling around in the ocean is yin. Wandering around in the garden, picking a flower here or there or whatever is yin. But getting shit done in the garden is yang, which is what most people, especially busy people, they get a lot done when they get out in the garden. Reading poetry.
That's called me.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
the purposeful garden person that gets a lot of stuff
Yeah, yeah.
done.
So reading poetry is yin. Having a bath with Epsom salts is a yin activity. So
Mhm.
daydreaming, interestingly, which often we stop children from daydreaming. It's very important to be able to daydream. So you get the feeling that the point is the feeling of it. It's formless activity. It's not goal orientated. It's more drifting. It's a very very different feeling of energy from that very purposeful directed yang energy.
I was actually just going to say the word that popped up in my mind is the lack of purpose to it. Is that fair to say that there is a lack of purpose? Like when you're walking around the garden, picking a flower or two, or just sort of wading through the ocean and stuff like that. There's no real purpose to it. It's just an activity that doesn't have any goal, as you say, or direction to it.
I would say maybe lack of direction or lack of goal, but I wouldn't say lack of purpose. I would say it's absolutely
Right.
connected with purpose because it's about experiencing joy and beauty and softness and slowness and maybe time. So that there's powerful purpose in that, um, but it's not a directed activity.
So it makes sense to me, but then it also confuses me at the same time, this concept, because I understand the yang aspect of meditation because it's very structured, purposeful, directive in the way that you operate with that. But often we get taught to do things like go and stand on some wet grass in the morning to sort of get grounded. Would you
Never
say
heard
that
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 from
was a
me.
that sort of type, grounding exercise where you would go and so a grounding exercise, for example, which is, would you say that that was a yin or a
That's going to be more
yang
of a
type
I think
aspect?
a grounding exercise is a yang activity. It's going to be more on the yang side because
On the yang side.
there's a structure to it, and it may have some purpose of calming you down and bringing a bit more yin energy in. So it can have a positive effect like that. Um, but I do a grounding exercise every morning and every evening. I get up. It's like, okay, I must do my grounding exercise. You can feel the yang energy even in the way I think about it. The exercise itself is good for me, but it becomes part of the structure of the day and the direction of the day. Whereas the yin thing, which I do sometimes, like I go out first thing in the morning. Sometimes I go and pick vegetables, but sometimes I just wander around and I look at the vegetables and just look at what's happening on the farm. Just wander around and just feel the day. That's yin.
Mhm.
But going to pick the
Mm.
vegetables, this morning we went and did an inspection of our swales because we had two storms. And that's yang. That was like, we're going out there. We went along the full length of them. We looked, we checked to see if there were any holes. That was a yang activity.
if I start to think about even what I was doing today, driving from the office to a client, that's a yang
Fairly
activity.
young, but there's some yin stuff going on in there because your mind, you don't have to pay much attention to driving. You drive like completely by second nature. So I think you take it as a
True.
kind of look, if you sit in the car and you debrief yourself from the previous meeting and then you sit and prepare yourself for the next meeting, that's yang. But if you can actually give yourself
Yeah.
permission, at least for a little while, to drift, to let your mind drift, to do nothing, to simply enjoy,
Mhm.
not listening to a podcast or educating yourself or anything, but just actually to it's like to smile at life.
Mm.
That's yin.
If I really reflect on the elements of my day, I would say I do hardly any yin.
I would say you're about right there, Matt. If you think about it, family. I remember when I was a kid, and of course things were really different then. We weren't scheduled in the way children are now. I had one ballet class a week, and that's it. And all we did as children was just play. We played in the garden, we played in our bedroom, we just played and kind of wandered around. It was very, very free, but that's not the case for most kids now. And if you think
No.
about really good family times, sometimes it's not that you're doing something. It's that actually you're just sitting around and you're having a laugh and there's no agenda and you're happy together. Doesn't happen maybe very often because very half the family not sitting around with the other half of the family, or the kids are in their bedrooms or whatever. But that kind of doing nothing time is not wasting time. It's has a different quality to it that we don't value because you can't market to that part of things. You market to the other side much more effectively, and so a lot of attention gets paid to the other side.
It's interesting. If I reflect on where that happens, typically I know the moments that where the family's sitting around having a chat or a laugh about something and that we're not really doing much and it's not structured. And I can feel those times because they become, I think, imprinted in your brain a lot more because you remember them because they are unique and you typically remember things that are unique. And then I also reflect about other times that that occurs and it more happens on holidays when you're away from the day to day. That would be when you spend more yin time sitting by a pool or reading a book for pleasure or sitting under a palm tree or you know sitting in the ocean as you say or digging a hole in sand in the beach. I think is one of those tasks because you're not doing it.
Absolutely
You're not doing
pointless.
anything. Exactly pointless. I spent probably 10 years of digging, making sandcastles with my kids. So I'm glad that there was a point to the pointlessness associated with that.
I think that, yeah, some people do manage at least to get some of that while they're on holiday. Nowadays, very often people have very purposeful holidays as well. And, there's all these things that they have to do and see and achieve on their holidays. And really, what I want to draw attention to is just how important that yin time is. It's not something to sacrifice because that is what leads to burnout. The interesting thing in the Chinese philosophy is when you get to the extreme, the opposite starts to grow in it. So if you think of the extreme yang, which is like totally structured, totally busy, always doing something, very directed, when you get too far, you'll get this kind of complete stillness, quietness will grow up in it. The other end, not able to do anything at all. That's what we call burnout. You get to the
Right.
point where you just can't do it anymore, and the opposite starts to arise in that, and you are forced usually to do nothing. I've known people who've not been able to work for 2, 3, 4, and somebody and you couldn't really work effectively for 17 years after burning out.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's recovery. It's just letting the system breathe and relax. Far better to do a bit of that every day.
Which is the whole concept of yin yang as a balance, as you say, in not being too extreme on one end because it's going to have a significant counteraction on the other part of it. And and if I reflect and come back to sort of business terms in how we do this and build this into the day, because I think that being a business owner is even more, it's another large element of yang, because all day, every day, you're solving problems. People want you to do something for them. You're always responsible and accountable for everything, and don't really have that downtime unless you build it into your day. And I think that's the structure of it. And maybe that's the biggest lesson. And we're taught to build things into our day like meditation and for that balance. But really, talking about it today, we're not really building in the right things into that. Sorry, that is a good practice and a habit in terms of mindfulness and meditation, and I firmly believe in it like you do. But I really like this concept of doing nothing into your day, and I can feel that we just don't do. But the discipline of being able to do that would be very challenging, and it is challenging for me to think about that.
I'm not the best example, but I am really aware of it, and I will often the weekends I'll always have some time. And when I talk about some time, I'm not talking about half an hour. There'll be at least half a day, 3-4 hours, where I really I don't do anything very deliberately, or I allow myself to drift, because I know that I need that. Sometimes if I've been working really hard, I'll also take some time during the day, but it's not easy. I do take time every morning. I get up early, but only start work at 9 o'clock. So I have quite a few hours before breakfast, and some of that time is really doing nothing time every single day. I think it would be a very interesting experiment, because I know that if people did that more, their businesses would actually be better.
I think there's no doubt about that, because of where we started this conversation, that last year, the toll that it took on people, including me, in terms of just being online 100% of the time and being very yang focused, it burnt lots of people out, and the fatigue element was really high towards the end of the year. And the feeling that you can see what you missed by just that experience that I had today, with probably, walking from one floor to the next floor, one meeting room to another one, passing somebody by and having a chat about nothing, purposeful, and then driving around Melbourne, was actually, I can see the benefit of doing that, and why we need to build some of that stuff in the day. But just how hard it is to build that discipline in. But I think for me, the concept that we're talking about is understanding why you need to do it, and then giving yourself permission to do it, is the two elements that help me change.
Yeah, because you were talking about wasting time. When this topic first came up today,
correct,
you saw it as like you have to drive somewhere, so you knew you had to do it, but you felt it was kind of close to wasting time. And that was where I picked it up and said, this is not wasting time. You're really right that people give themselves a very hard time around this kind of thing. And they think, because we are genuinely marketed to, especially in business, that we should be ultra productive. We should be implement. We should be doing things all the time. Everything's about time management and productivity. But I just don't believe that that's the right thing. I believe that all of us will do better if we have more, like a bit more maturity about it, to be honest.
So maturity is a great word, because one of the things that also comes up for me is the word guilt, and that I have to be working harder and I have to work the hardest, or, if somebody else is working harder, then, I've got to also keep up my end of the bargain and work equally as hard, from a productive and a yang principle.
Was it the school or the Catholics who got you? Or both? And society, and seriously.
Parents, school, Catholic. But I've got the whole shooting match, don't worry about that. So that's where the guilt comes, as you know. but yeah, it's a thing, and so we're, as you say, we're wired and built that way, and it does take a level of maturity to say, hang on a minute, is this serving us? Is this doing a good thing for you as an individual? And therefore, as you say, you as a business owner and running a good business.
The thing you have to remember, this is the tricky part probably, is that if it's good for you, it's good for everyone on your team as well.
Yes, they often say that. If they say, the happy wife, happy life scenario, it's happy boss, happy life scenario too. I think so. That comes up, but it's these are really good reminders, and I think the biggest takeaway for me today was this concept around yin and the concept that some of the practices that we think are yin practices are not, the yang, like the meditation aspect of it. I think that's a real eye opener because once again, it's very structured and disciplined and and purposeful and directional and that sort of type thing. And what we're really talking about is the opposite to that.
Yes, if I could do anything in this podcast, I would want to convey the feeling of yin, this quality of energy that is formless. It's heading towards the formless rather than the formed. It's heading towards the feminine rather than the masculine. It's this drifting, wandering, kind of gentle, soft, everything we're not supposed to be, except who on earth said that we weren't supposed to be that? Like, how beautiful to be that, as well as all those other things. Because if we can feel, there's a pleasure, there's a real beauty in that energy. It is slower, and many people found some of it last year. People who weren't working really hard, I think they did find some more yin time. I've met a lot of people during COVID who were really forced in on themselves in a way because they just didn't have outward stuff to do, which was a good thing. If we can give ourselves permission, but first of all, feel the quality of it, feel the pleasure of actually not having to do everything in the same way, not everything being a to-do list item, not everything having a clear goal, not everything being towards a specific direction. This is in the direction, if you want, or for the purpose of a good life, or for the purpose of a more joyful life, and for the purpose of experiencing a richness in your life. Because you start to feel poor when you do everything in the same way. It doesn't feel rich.
There's also a feeling of being present,
Yeah.
with observing what's going on around you, is what you're saying, and that feeling hopefully helps to fight the negativity that we associate with guilt and waste of time, because you can sense the benefit of being and doing what exactly that you're talking about there, that feeling that you get. You go, well, I actually feel good about it. I shouldn't feel guilty. I shouldn't feel like I'm wasting time, because it's actually a good thing and I should be enjoying it.
I've got a beautiful testimonial actually that somebody gave me on video. She'd been doing a course, and I'm teaching everybody to relax. And my definition of relaxing is really doing nothing. It's just absolutely doing nothing. And she sits on this video and she's laughing and she said, I feel so relaxed. I've never felt so relaxed before. And she said, and then when I came to launch my book, and she was really successful and was like 7 times Amazon bestseller, blah, 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 7 categories or whatever. But the look on her face of surprise at how successful everything had been. And I know that in the months prior to that, she was not feeling successful at all, because I had already done some work with her, and I know it was a very difficult situation. But to see the look on her face and the knowing that it only happened because she was relaxed. And that if she'd not been relaxed, if she'd been doing it the way she was doing everything before, she would not have got such good results. We need more stories like that. We need to tell stories of how I stopped being the hero who worked till 10 o'clock at night every night and my business got better. You probably have one of those. I'm sure you worked a lot harder when you were younger.
No doubt. I'm sort of, I can feel it, that I don't work as hard as I used to. Some of that's because I'm not capable of doing
Your
it in
business is more
terms of,
successful. A lot more.
and yeah, my business is. Yeah, it is a lot more successful, but it's also grown up too, as
Yeah.
I've grown up. And I can see that you're right. That the more that we can see and examples of this, the word that comes up for me is trust. The more that we can trust that if we do relax and if we do sort of take that time and and be less yang orientated, will have a significant benefit for us and then also the people around us and therefore also our businesses.
Yeah, exactly. It helps. It helps to have stories. But in the meantime, without the stories, my recommendation is to try it out for yourself and become a story.
And then tell
And
us
then tell
about
us
it.
about it, yes. Exactly. Okay, well,
Well, because that gives us benefit too, because we like we're talking about this today as well, is that it gives us such a great sense of achievement and purpose when people get great results from the work that we do collectively and
yeah,
separately for them. And so, then the more we can share those successes with other people, it builds that momentum, it builds that different way of looking at things and a better way of
yeah,
living.
it builds the story. Well, that's very cool. I'm definitely feeling it now. And I've got 2 more hours of work. I don't finish till 7 p.m. this evening. So but I can really feel, I just can feel the pleasure of it.
Yeah. And I think that's the point. It's the feeling. And I think we've all felt at some point in time that daydreaming, that loss, that sort of sense of exactly what you're talking about there. And it's about tapping into it and having more of that time where it isn't as structured and yang orientated.
That's where worlds get created.
Excellent. Well, it's been another great chat today. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to The Spirit of Business with Matt Murphy and Sarah McCrum. We'll be back next week with another episode. You'll find the show notes with links and other useful information on our website, spiritofbusiness.live. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends.